The human family is, come on, we are in deep shit. And although we've always been a troubled species, we are facing a number of existential challenges that have never existed before. From nuclear self-annihilation to climate change to these deadly viruses that no longer have any boundaries and can get from one place to the other in the same time a jet plane can get from one place to the other. Is there any hope? I mean, seriously, are aliens gonna fly in and save us? Will Jesus save us? Will Buddha? Will God save us? God in any form? I don't think so. But I think there is hope. I feel it. And it lives inside of every human being. It's this event. The two things that in my mind will save us, that are continually reaching, empathy and curiosity. Empathy and curiosity. You know, I actually thought that I was alone and I was actually being creative and original when and I'm putting quotes here, I came up with this two-pronged understanding of what amounts to saving grace. I was wrong. When I started doing my study, business in the last 10 years is all over it. Advertising is all over it. Psychology's been all over it forever. Education has been all over it. These two processes and their linkage as integral to each other is something that has been thought out over and over. In Forbes magazine, there was an article that talks about curiosity enables empathy. Carl Rogers talked about curiosity is the accelerant to empathy. And at Harvard Business School, curiosity and empathy, it's the way to overcome differences. And curiosity without empathy is like marching in time and going nowhere. For those of you who don't know marching stuff, when you just sit there and lift your legs one after the other but go nowhere, that's called marching in time. Empathy, simply defined as the ability to experience another's thoughts and feelings from the situation of their point of view. Curiosity is the strong desire to learn and to know something. Over and over, we see that these two words come together as empathic curiosity. And when we look at the many different articles, it fosters leadership, team building. It gives those who participate literally an edge and innovation. It literally is an antidote for bias and prejudice and even judgments. We have to let go of our presuppositions to really hear another person. It is inherently anti-racist, and it cares about what motivates it. And what it does motivate is action. And when it comes to justice, curious empathy over and over. And most of all, empathic curiosity helps us to connect with people around us and ultimately to nature and the world with all its diversity. Empathic curiosity is what I would call a prime connector. And there's so much to go into on this. There's no way we're going to touch it all. Every week we basically, we pull on a string and we find it connected to everything because that's the way the world's set up. But we're going to pull on the thread of empathic curiosity. And I'm going to suggest that it's really what's going to save us. And there are processes over and over that we can look at. So here we are. I'm with my friends, Mary Ann Rudis, who's coming from Spokane Valley, and Bob Hayes, who's coming all the way from Florida. I'm Red Hawk, and I'm in Spokane, Washington. And I guess I'm just going to ask you, Mary Ann, empathic curiosity, where does that take you?
You know, as you were describing this, I started to think of those as separate processes. So empathy And the way you defined it was seeing another's point of view and being able to relate to them on a different level. And then curiosity, where you want to learn, you want to know more. And by themselves, they're both powerful. But when you combine them the way in this way as empathic curiosity, what a power that is, because you're right. I think just being empathetic doesn't move you to action, and just being curious doesn't move you to action. But when you put those together, then to me it seems like that is motivation. And I'm always asking the question, what do we do with this? What now? And I think this whole idea of empathic curiosity can lead us down to what now? What do we do now?
Wow. I hope so. I pray so. Once we start getting inside stuff, things start looking different. Bob, what say you?
Well, I think that you used the term connection in your intro. And I think that both of these processes, whether they're separate or two sides of the same coin or two processes that are totally intertwined, they're both necessary for us to connect to the world outside of ourselves. And that's, both are necessary in the sense that curiosity enables us to learn how to survive in a hostile environment. We learn how to improve our condition. But without empathy, it's a dead end. We stop when we have just survived, and we don't move ahead beyond that to, I'll use the term thrive. We can't thrive without empathy, because with only curiosity, we're just limited to a narrow world that is within our physical body or our immediate environment. But once we add empathy to it, it makes that connection limitless. And it also fuels the connection because it taps into our feelings. And the feelings then can motivate us to action, as Marianne was just saying. So I'm not sure that, you can try and separate them for definitional purposes, but I don't really think that they can operate as two separate things. I think that it's almost like an atom with a proton and an electron. They're different, but they're the same system that are forming that atom. And empathic curiosity seems to be a system that's constantly changing and evolving as we as an individual change and evolve. And it's a motivation, and it's also a reward, because when we can begin to empathize with those around us, that connection becomes stronger, and ultimately it increases our own feelings of self-worth and of I'll use the term connection again because I can't think of another one.
Well, I think the word that came to my mind was belongingness.
Yeah.
Which is, it's one thing to be connected to nature. It's another to see that you belong to it. And I think that those are important pieces. And, I want to tell a little story from Martin Buber, which I think is valuable. It's from Psychology Today. Martin Buber was meditating in his room, and a former student knocked on his door and asked to talk. Now, Buber politely listened and engaged with his visitor, but his attention was drifting in elsewhere. He was just wanted to get back to his meditation and his spiritual stuff. Well, eventually a student left, and Buber never saw him again. But shortly after the conversation, the young man took his life. Now, this is one of those experiences that changed Buber and impacted him permanently, and it shifted his worldview. As he said, I learned that he had come to me not casually, born by destiny, not for a chat, but for a decision. And he wrote this in a book he wrote called Between Man and Man. Now, Buber believed that if he hadn't been so engrossed in his religious pursuits, he could have recognized that his former student was in peril. From that moment forward, Buber said he committed to being fully present and listening to what he called the unspoken question. And what's interesting, you see, this unspoken question, today in our divisive world, we are triggered so easily. We have lost the empathic curiosity to see why, at least for me, why people on the right are so hateful and why they're so angry. And this has been helpful for me. I have to say, when I get into a conversation with someone who I need to be empathic, I need to exercise empathic curiosity, sometimes I get triggered. It's very easy for me to talk about this. It's very difficult for me to do this. And this is what some have called the courageous conversation. You know, how do we let people in who really actually hate me and have said that they hate me and they hate what I stand for? As one listener wrote to a friend, and Bob knows this, this podcast is a threat to humankind.
An existential threat.
An existential threat. So how do I hear them? And this is what I think the big piece of empathic curiosity has for us today. And that is simply allows us to listen to each other and really seeking to understand another's point of view, even though we may never disagree with it, and even though it might not change our own perspective, to see that and to see, you know, for me, when I get into those conversations, I see how bundled up many right-wingers are in their dogmatic perspective. And I try not to do that in my own perspective. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I just wanted to throw a question out. Does empathy have limits? And if so, are they important? I mean, if we are empathic, let's say Hitler, would we let him go about his business? Or would we say, no, I can't empathize with that kind of behavior?
Well, and you're putting your finger on a very important thing, and I think it will make it part of the conversation. You know, many churches that I visited, especially Church of Christ, which are, you know, I went into one Church of Christ, and the guy made a little picture of his church and then drew a big circle around it and said, if you go to this church, you're inside this circle and you are saved and you are going to heaven. If you're outside this circle, you are going to hell. So empathy, when you dogmatize it, when you do limit it, it actually has just the opposite effect. That's why this curiosity piece, I think, is really important, because it makes you want to get inside another person's understanding. And I have to say, I went to some of these churches and got inside their understanding and went, screw this. This is totally fucked.
Well, you know, I think
set the limit. You set the limit on your empathy there because you learned more about what was going on there. Sorry, Marianne.
Well, no, that's okay. I think there's a distinction here, too, between being empathetic towards a person and being empathetic towards their behavior. I don't think we have to condone behavior, but when we empathize, and you used Hitler as an example, or some really, really dogmatic religious people who approach the world as everyone's an enemy, right? And so you're an enemy. And so how can you empathize with that? But then if you start to understand that every single person has some value, that person was born as a child, they were raised in a certain way, they came, and I think that's where the empathy comes in, where you can see how damaged they've become because of their life. And will you ever change them? Maybe, maybe not, but I don't think we can change anyone. Yeah. So I think there's a distinction between tolerating behavior that harms and empathizing with the fact that this person is a person that harms.
Yeah, and it's important for our listeners. This is not acceptance. As a matter of fact, when the U.S. Army came into Auschwitz, they made the townspeople walk through, because the townspeople had tacitly said okay and had some plausible deniability that this was happening, which was pure crap. And so I think it was Eisenhower or whoever was in charge of that regiment or whatever, literally had every townsperson come through and had the staff that was working Auschwitz be the ones to clean it up. And so there's a point where it's not about acceptance, but sometimes forcibly causing the other to experience empathy. I assure you, those town people who walked through could no longer deny what was going on, outside their town. And, all those people were going to their shops and eating in their restaurants and doing all this stuff. So I want to be clear. Empathic curiosity does not mean acceptance. Empathic curiosity means you get inside it. You think of, let's use the, Nazi Germany. How many social studies have been done on what happened to create fascism? And the word fascism comes from a very good term. It's Italian. It's basically saying one piece of straw you can break. If you put all those pieces of straw together, you can't break them. That's a fascis or something like, I can't remember the exact.
Yeah, it goes back to the Romans.
It goes back to the Romans. So I want us to see how to get inside that. After the Second World War in Japan, their God Emperor stepped down and did something he rarely or never did before in front of people. He spoke and he took off his hat. And it created a whole different understanding of what that war meant to the Japanese and how it came to mean that. And through empathy, and some of it was, the atom bomb. They were like, experience this sucker. It was like, what have we done? And Japan has done an amazing job at creating civility. I think they've backed themselves into a corner a little bit. But it's this piece, to me, Jesus ain't going to save us. God ain't going to save us. The aliens ain't going to save us. But I believe if we can learn to grow this empathic curiosity, and I'm going to just take a minute here and give you some ideas of how to do that. The first is, and this is again from Psychology Today, a guy named Tennant, bring back your childhood habit of asking why not, and what if. And I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast. What the fuck is going on here? I have to hit the explicit button because I thought this needed so profane. Another issue is that he suggests is listen with your feet. And what he means by that is when you go to someone and you want to practice this, look at your feet and truly listen to what they're saying. Really receive it. Don't get caught up in your own stuff. Stay focused. Another is immerse yourself in stories. One of the things that blows my mind about Edie, she has a superpower. No matter where we go, strangers or not, people just tell her the stories. They just start telling them. And I'm going, nobody ever does this to me, but I'm going to hang next to her to hear these stories. And then reflect on interactions. Next time you meet someone new, take a moment and assess whether you're sizing them up. Personality and worldview. Are you making assumptions? Are you putting preconceptions? This gets back to be here now, but these are places you can look at yourself and go, all these things are getting in the way of me listening and really hearing where this person's coming from. So I throw those out just for the sake of conversation, but also to show that there are things we can do that can engender this sense of empathic curiosity.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for each of us who are trying to self-evolve. But I wonder, how do we teach someone else to empathize? And is that something we should be trying to do? Let's look at what's going on in Tennessee with the protests on gun violence and the expulsion of the protesters from their House of Representatives and so forth. Do these people who are in charge of the of that House of Representatives, do they have any real empathy for the children and staff members who were killed in that school, and the families and the people who are afraid to send their children to school? Do they think in those terms, or do they just think in terms of the money they receive from the NRA or the ideological stance that they've taken in terms of the Second Amendment?
Yeah.
How do we get them to be more empathetic?
Well,
is it possible?
Yeah, and I don't think that's something we could take the responsibility for. But what we can do is say empathy's not acceptance. And I understand their fear. I understand white people being scared to death of diversity. I understand white people able to deny their sense of privilege because they don't see it. Over and over, I watch these things. But at the same time, that is the struggle. And can we teach empathy? Yeah. I think that...
Is that something that could be in our school systems? Could we be teaching children to be more
yes.
empathetic?
And there...
there are teachers that do that. Yeah.
A few, yeah.
And I taught, I guess I facilitated a number of groups called Values Clarification when I was in college. Probably 15, 20 groups, more than that if you consider the... my ministry and how I use those exercises in ministry. But I think we can. I think we can challenge, quadratic equations are part of calculus. Oxidation equations are part of, organic chemistry. Empathy and curiosity should be part of social learning, in my mind. We should teach more psychology. Now, I have to say, they probably teach more of it now than they did when I was in school. But I think that part of it is giving a language for people to engage these aspects of themselves, especially those aspects that might cut them off from connection. And so empathic curiosity is a way to create an antidote in one's thinking, to ask some of these simple questions, the unspoken ones, if you will.
Well, and it also opens you up to allow you to put yourself in another person's position. So empathy really helps you to get inside. And when you were talking, I was reminded of that experiment that teacher did with the blue-eyed and brown-eyed children. I think it was a 3rd or 4th grade class. Pretty famous. I can't remember her name, but where she divided the class into blue-eyed children and brown-eyed children and discriminated against the one group over the other, and how quickly the children started to gang up and to look down on them. And I often wonder, I would love to see a follow-up, 50 years later on where those people are at. But they learned empathy firsthand, especially the ones that became the discriminated against group. It's...
And now we're back to the golden rule. Because it all really gets down to that curiosity. Empathic curiosity is in service to the golden rule. I watch, you guys were talking about how do we teach it. I watch a lot of reels just because, they're kind of fun. And the ones that really get me are the racist ones where cops pull over a black person or a white woman in a neighborhood doesn't like black kids playing out there. And the bullies who get their due. You see, I think we're beginning to do these, people diss the reels, but I go, I wonder if we're teaching some empathy here, or if we're not teaching anti-racism here, if we're not teaching, what it's like to be inside that black person's. I think in the last 3 years, we have really learned what it feels like to be inside a black person. Even the president said, I never had to give my boys the talk. So we're learning a language. We're learning finer nuances in our language to talk about these aspects of human beings. And we're also seeing, and I'm going to suggest that the reason people say Jesus saves, the reason people say Buddha saves, is because they had empathic curiosity par excellence. They were getting inside the poor. They were getting inside the suffering. And they were seeing the dilemma of being a human being. And how do we respond?
Yeah, and I think the idea behind people who are really Christians or really Buddhists in the truest sense, they're trying through their own empathic curiosity to become more like Jesus and more like Buddha. And as you understand how deep their empathic curiosity was, it motivates you to deepen your own.
And that was a point in my opening statement, that when you really start practicing this, you not just find more connection to other human beings who might be different than you, but you also find more connection to the world around you, to nature. Even in New York City, with all of that going around you, you can feel the connection to civilization in all its crazy ass stuff. And I love it. Go ahead, Mary Ann.
Well, I was going to say, that the important part is that we are all connected. We're all connected to each other. And I think empathic curiosity brings that out. It makes us aware of that. And we can see those connections a little bit more clearly when we can be empathic.
It's almost like empathic curiosity is the electricity that's running through the invisible lines that connect us.
I like it. Yeah.
Right.
And believe it or
you
not,
can close it off.
Believe it or not,
you can close it off, and you can expand it.
I need to offer some boundaries here, because time, although I'm convinced doesn't exist, but when I look in the mirror, I go, damn, it sure looks like it exists to me. We're coming to the end of our time. So, Bob, final comments?
All right, I'm going to go back to my idea of what are the limits of empathic curiosity. And I think that when we're trying to take action in the world, we can not only view others with empathy, but we can identify others who don't act empathically. And I'll use our representatives as an example. If we can look at the behavior of people and identify that as non-empathic, then we need to vote them out of office, because the people we need in office need to have empathic curiosity more than any other trait. And if they don't, they should not be in office. And that's an action, a positive action that we can take.
And that's why this language of empathic curiosity is so important, so we can begin to discern those who don't give a shit about us, but just care about power. And that's part of America and the world's struggle right now. Mary Ann, final comments?
Yeah, because good points. And I think part of this is we are marrying the intellectual and our feeling aspects. And in order to do that, it's going to move us to action. It's going to move us to, and when you talk about people that don't exhibit these kind of qualities, and you mentioned it earlier, I really think they are fearful. They're scared to death. They're afraid of losing their positions, their power, whatever. And I think we're not going to be able to defeat that with the same kind of animosity. So we have to approach this from a love perspective, right? And that's where empathy comes in, where we have to understand that these people have issues that they need to figure out. But we can take action, and we don't have to tolerate bad behavior. We can draw lines in the sand and use our own power to shift things.
Yeah. Amen.
And I'm curious as to how that will happen. But
well, I think, one of the things you said was very valuable, and that's that we can't use the same stick to beat them that they're using to beat us, because we know that hate, hostility, prejudice, bias are not gonna. We can't use those tools and expect the world to get larger. And this whole thing brings us somewhere really quite amazing, because one of the longest studies was an 80-year study. I think it was out of Harvard. And basically what they did is they just started tracking people. They tracked people who graduated from college, and then they tracked people who didn't graduate from college, and they followed them for like 30 years. This is an amazing thing. And they were trying to find out, what is it that made someone not successful economically, but truly happy? And what is that? Well, they found out. And it's not money. It's not a big house. It's not having lots of stuff and girls or boys or any of that. It was a single thing. And what that thing is? Relationships. The quality of one's relationship will determine the truest heart course in their life. That's the place where you're at peace with yourself, you're listening, you're open. That's an amazing thing, relationships. And that's where we're going next week, relationships. Let's face it, if we're all one, that connection that creates relationships might just be everything. My friends, blessings and peace in all you do.